Good evening. I am Karen Taylor. I am Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen. And we are so pleased that you can all be here this evening, our in-person audience, and of course our online audience. This is actually the last lecture of 2024, but as you may see from the flyer on your seat, we will certainly be back in 2025. And this evening, for our concluding talk of the season, we have an absolutely fascinating topic: patented 1,000 design patents, with author Thomas Rinaldi. The talk is based on the book of the same name, which I just happen to have here. And if you've had, I don't know if you our in-person audience, you've had an opportunity to look through it, and I'm trying to towards the camera, but it's just full of these incredibly fascinating objects that, of course, are part of our daily life, and of course there was a patent for them. But of course Tom is going to tell you far more about this, and I do want to mention, as regards purchasing a copy of this book, at the back of the room we have Jason from Books On Call NYC, and he will be happy to facilitate the sale at the conclusion of the lecture. The book is also available online through the Faden website, www.faden.com. I want to thank Thomas Donoghue, our window curator, for designing yet another wonderful window display. This window absolutely captures the inventiveness and creativity of tonight's topic. And I urge you all, when you're leaving this evening, to have a look at our display windows outside. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York is a non-profit organization that was founded in 1785 by the skilled craftsmen of the city. Today, our 239-year-old organization continues to serve the people of the City of New York through our various cultural and educational programs. These include the General Society Library, of course, of which this in-person lecture is taking place tonight, our John M. Mossman Lock Museum, which you can see above, and I realize we haven't turned the lights on, but we certainly will do at the conclusion of the talk, our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, and of course, this lecture series, a lecture series that has a very distinguished history. Our lecture series originally started in 1838. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker this evening. Thomas Rinaldi is an architectural designer based in New York who currently works at Walter B. Melvin Architects, focusing on historic facades. He has degrees from Georgetown and Columbia Universities. He's written several architecture books, and his photographs have been published in numerous places, including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Post. He has lectured widely, including at the New York Public Library and the Society of Architectural Historians. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Tom Rinaldi.
Thank you, Karen, very much, and thanks to Mr. Donoghue for that fantastic window display, which was a really nice surprise to see walking up to the building tonight. And thanks for everyone who's joining online, and thanks for everyone who's joining in person. Is there anyone who's here at the General Society for the first time tonight? Okay, there's a few people. I had my first time not that long ago, too. It's a real honor, having been here for a few lectures through the years, to be giving one myself in this place. And so we'll try to do it justice. So what is this all about? The short answer is patents. The long answer we'll get into. It's a little bit complicated. It's a lot of material to cover. So to help make sense of it, I've divided this up into three parts. First, we'll start by going through the origin story of how I became interested in this subject, etc. Then second, I'll attempt to offer an overview of what a design patent actually is. And then third, we'll explore a bit what I think all of this tells us, at least what they told me. and what I thought made this whole expedition worthwhile. So we'll try to cover all of this in 45 minutes or so, leaving some time at the end for questions, and then we'll all move on with our lives. Okay, so let's get started. This book is a catalog of 1,000 design patents. None of the patents are my own. I've not patented anything, I'm sorry to say. The drawings are not mine either. One of the frustrations, quirky things about this project is that after all of the years I spent exploring the subject, I still cannot name for you any of the people who actually drew these patent drawings. The artists of the patent drawings go anonymous, which is crazy to me, but that's how it is. What is mine here is the curatorial exercise involved. 1,000 patents sounds like a lot, and when I first pitched this book idea, I pitched it as more or less exactly what it became, 1,000 design patents. I thought 1,000 was a large enough number that would make it easy to include all the things that I thought were important and worth including, and that it would satisfy me to include. I learned in the course of doing this that I was profoundly wrong about that. Whittling down to 1,000 patents for the book was an excruciating process. The pain of having to leave certain things out was almost unbearable. This is because the 1,000 patents in the book are drawn from a pool of now more than 1 million design patents that have been issued by the US Patent Office to date. In fact, the book excludes patents issued before the year 1900. So the pool I had to choose from was really about 950,000 or so. The process of making this book ultimately involved creating a spreadsheet to compare the number of patents included in the book against the number of patents actually issued year by year to be sure that I wasn't overly favoring certain periods, which I found I was. At the end of the talk, let's see if you can guess which periods. And a similar exercise to be sure that I wasn't favoring certain typologies, certain kinds of things, which I also found I was, so we had to do some leveling. It was, to be sure, an interaction with a subject that I came to love, an interaction that forced me to develop a certain kind of expertise. And so with that, let's finally advance to the next slide and get into how I got started on all of this. You might say it all started with this. Picture it, a church parking lot flea market in upstate New York, one Sunday morning circa 1990. I was about 10 years old, and I spotted this old radio in a pile of things. I think my words to the seller was, "How much is this sucker?" And to my mother's bemusement, it came home with us afterwards for an exchange of $5. This kicked off an on-again, off-again love affair with these kinds of objects that continues now a few years and a few purchases later. Collecting, and there's a difference between hoarding and collecting, but we'll save that for another talk. Collecting is one of those activities that it's easy to indulge in without ever really examining what it is that motivates you. And for years I indulged without ever reflecting on why it was that I was drawn to this activity and to certain kinds of objects. Years went by and I moved on to other things. I co-authored my first book, Hudson Valley Ruins, in 2006, and a few years later a second book, New York Neon. The Ruins book, as my co-author Rob Yasensak and I call it, looks at historic buildings in the Hudson Valley between New York and Albany that all have in common that they're threatened by neglect, abandoned. These were buildings that Rob and I found in the backdrop of our growing up on the Hudson River that we loved, but that had a habit of disappearing on us. So we independently started photographing them over a period of years and eventually turned our devotion to the subject into this book whose cover is here on the left. Part of this exercise was about trying to describe to a wider audience why we thought these kinds of cast-off buildings were worth giving a damn about. And a big part of that was sussing out their architectural provenance. A lot of them turned out to be the work of really important figures in architectural history. We have buildings like this one, which is the Hudson River State Hospital up in Poughkeepsie, designed by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Clark Withers, with grounds by Olmsted and Vaux, whose names should be familiar to anyone who's ever been in Central Park. And this one, which is what the old New York Central Railroad Station in Newburgh looked like when we photographed it about 30 years ago. It's since been restored. This is a building that turned out to be designed by Warren and Wetmore, co-architects of another station that's a few blocks away from here. And this one, which is the old power station that electrified the tracks going into Grand Central Terminal by the architects Reed and Stem, also known as the other co-architects of Grand Central Terminal. Looking back at it now, these buildings were sort of like flea market finds, big flea market finds. Rob and I became masters at hunting down their architects, which was more difficult back at a time when not quite everything was digitized online. When the architect was someone we hadn't heard of before, we'd look them up to see what else they had done, which then put our subject building in the context of other significant works by the same architect. This became sort of a sport. A lot of architectural historians, I think, will tell you that it can get to be almost an addictive pastime. I'm foreshadowing a little bit now, and to foreshadow a little more, Rob and I also included things like this in the book. This is what's left of a 1939 Buick sedan up near Catskill. Here, as with many of the buildings we photographed, we were able to provide information regarding the design provenance of the subject. In this case, naming General Motors' famous head of styling, Harley Earl. In fact, the authorship here is probably a little more complicated than that. But we also included this, which is the abandoned husk of an FL9 type locomotive that lay awaiting its fate for many years up by the Croton-Harmon station on the Hudson Line. Here was a design that was at least as iconic as that of the 1939 Buick, but one we had to leave unattributed in our book back in 2006 because its authorship was just too obscure to track down. But we'll come back to this one. My next book took on the subject of neon storefront signs here in New York City. We'll get to patents soon. Like the ruins, I'm sure that what drew me to this subject was the ephemeral nature of the signs. Here, even more than with the ruins, the game or the sport was to get to these things before they disappeared. But again, I wanted in the book to be able to do something besides simply show pretty pictures of the subjects. I saw an opportunity in being able to explore these things as works of design with a design provenance akin to that of the buildings that Rob and I had photographed on the Hudson River. As you might imagine, this was a lot harder to do for neon signs than for buildings, identifying who designed these things. In this slide, we're looking at the ancient sign that hangs over the storefront of an establishment called Mom's Liquors on Staten Island, juxtaposed with a design drawing from a pattern book for sign makers that was published, I think, in the 1930s. It's not a confirmed attribution, but it's not a bad start. In being able to speak to the authorship of these signs, I would look at things like these little maker's badges that could be found on some of the signs themselves, but this was really a kind of imperfect approach. I reached out to old-timers in the sign business in New York, which helped me to unearth this design drawing for the Papaya King sign that unfortunately just disappeared from the Upper East Side of Manhattan here. But this was a flashlight in a graveyard. I thought I had an ace in the hole with buildings department records, which in theory are supposed to identify the maker of every outdoor electric sign installed in the city. Here's a picture of one that unfortunately has been in the news lately, as Smith's Bar over on 44th Street and 8th Avenue has just closed to be replaced with a cannabis shop. Anyway, this was a rare case where the DOB paperwork identified a maker, in this case the Day-Night Neon Sign Company, but this turned out to be a fluke. The information was almost always left blank on the form or filled out with just the name of the permit expediter and not the sign shop that had made the thing. Anyway, in the meantime, I found myself here in Manhattan living in sort of a dangerous place, which was a few blocks from what had been a sort of flea market district here in Manhattan. Here's a headline from a few years ago when the last of these Chelsea flea markets was poised to vanish. It came back happily. This had the effect, though, of rekindling that old hunter-gatherer instinct that I'd hit upon back in my youth upstate, and I started bringing little things home again. But now I found myself exhibiting the same tendencies toward these flea market finds that I had exhibited towards neon signs and the ruins previously, a curiosity about who designed them, an interest in placing them in that kind of a context, and an impulse to elevate their significance by possibly linking them to the bodies of work of known designers, or were there perhaps unknown designers that we should know about? But how would you ever even start to find out who designed these things? Well, there were a few threads to start tugging at. There are, of course, those famous objects of design whose design story is well known. Here we have the famous tulip chairs by Eero Saarinen, things you see at the Met or at the MoMA, items whose authorship is widely known. But this is really kind of low-hanging fruit for the serious design historian. So I began to dig deeper, spending nights at the library, paging through trade publications. Trade publications are the ultimate goldmine for almost any endeavor in historical research. You can find anything, I should say, almost anything. This is a kind of typical spread from what you'd find in the pages of a magazine like Industrial Design. These were helpful to a point. There were other resources too, and I began to collect information anywhere I could find it. Here's a handy little spotter's guide that was put out by the US Post Office a few years ago. Handy anyway for 12 objects, and handy again only to a point. We'll get back to this. And then, of course, there was Google. Among the things that would turn up in Google searches aimed at unearthing designer information for things like radios and locomotives, you would get the occasional document like this. Now this, I suspect, most of us will probably be able to recognize as a patent, or at least a patent drawing. Some of us may also recognize this as the famous locomotive for the 1937 version of the New York Central Railroad's 20th Century Limited, which is well known for having been the work of the famous industrial designer. Can anyone name him? We got a correct answer from the front row, Henry Dreyfuss. But if you squint at this drawing, you'll notice something. There's a few things confusing, not least that Henry Dreyfuss's name is not at the top of the document. So intuitively, per my layperson's understanding of what a patent actually is that a patent isn't so much about who designed a certain thing, but it's about how that certain thing works or functions. Patents are about inventions, not designs. So we'll look for Edison's name on a patent for the incandescent light bulb, or Eli Whitney on the cotton gin, for instance, but we're not necessarily going to look for Henry Dreyfuss's name on a patent for the 20th Century Limited, right? Well, then how do you explain this? These kinds of patent documents would also turn up in my Google searches. Same object, here with Dreyfuss named as the author. It took longer than I cared to admit, but eventually I came to realize that what I was looking at here were in fact two different kinds of documents. On the left, what we lay people normally think of when we hear the word patent, a document assigning authorship to something technical, in this case the technical aspects of how this thing is put together. We'll call this a patent. We call this a patent typically, but when we call this document on the left a patent, that's really sort of a shorthand. It's not just a patent, it's a type of patent, which is a utility patent. There's another type of patent, a design patent, and you can and often do have utility patents and design patents for the same thing. So the design patent is what we see here on the right. And you can see a distinction between these two kinds of drawings, and which for me, when I first started seeing these, they kind of look the same. But now I can spot them from a mile away. And seeing them next to each other here, you probably can too. The one on the left, the utility patent, has, for instance, little key tags keying into various specific parts of the drawing. The one on the right has no key tags at all. That's your dead giveaway. Here we're at the tulip chair again. In some cases, both the utility and design patent will recognize the same author. I'm using the term author, but in patent parlance, the term is inventor for both. But just as often, the two kinds of patents name different parties. Here is a case in point for a radio that was designed by a Clarence Karstad. You could find this on display at the Metropolitan Museum. Unfortunately, not on my shelves yet. But for the design historian, these design patents offer a goldmine of raw data, identifying the design provenance of, as we've noted, over 1 million objects, or articles of manufacture, again to use the technical parlance. The existence of this database, up until recently little known outside the circle of patent agents and industrial designers, came to me as a revelation. I'm obliged at this point to insert a footnote, which is that there's a third type of patent issued by the US Patent and Trademark Office, which is plant patents, to patent new varieties of plants, but we'll leave that aside and just acknowledge that it exists. So, all of that explains how I got roped into this project, but now let's take a moment to look at exactly what a design patent is. We've started to kind of gather that. Here's a favorite example of mine. It's a favorite because it's a nice drawing, but it's also a favorite because this is an ultra-familiar object, something all of us have either owned or used at some point, but something which even the design-oriented among us have probably never paused to consider as a work of design. Whether or not you think this is a great design, this patent document now enables us to understand who designed it and when. It's a great example of what you learn from these documents. Who designed the thing when they filed for the patent versus when the patent was issued, and in some cases, but not all, who can be identified as the assignee, which is the patent term for patron. Basically, if the designer was acting in someone else's employ, the manufacturer of a thing usually. To further emphasize the distinction between utility and design patents, the US government began issuing utility patents in 1790, just 1 year after the country's founding. based on a system that had been established in England during the Industrial Revolution. Design patents came later, about 50 years later. What had happened in the intervening 50 years was the development not just of inventions, but of what many of those patented inventions had facilitated, which was, namely, mass production, processes for mass production, stamping, weaving, cutting, and notably, casting. One of the key proponents for the establishment of a system for design patents was J.L. Mott, whose Mott Iron Works is familiar to architectural historians, especially here in New York, for its role in the emergence of cast iron architecture. They also made other things, like bathtubs, for instance, and in any case, things the process of casting enabled them to make a lot of. Mott was one of the manufacturers who saw that the existing system for protecting proprietary rights for the way things worked, by way of utility patents, left rights for how things looked unprotected, and that this was a problem. He and other manufacturers agitated in the 1830s and got the government to institute a system of design patents with the passage of the Design Patent Act of 1842, which also borrowed from English precedent. Now, we've noted that there are now just over 1 million design patents that have been issued since then. There are and always have been many more utility patents than design patents. The USPTO issued its 12 millionth utility patent over the summer. The ratio of utility patents to design patents is, and pretty much always has been, about 10-1, which probably helps to explain why so few of us seem to even know about the existence of design patents. At first, the government issued just about a dozen design patents in the first year, not many. Some of the first ones, though, are interesting to look at. The first one was for a typeface, and there's actually no image to go with it, curiously. But these first ones give us a sense for the kind of things that were being patented then. Here's design patent number 3, which is for a girandole or a candelabrum that could be cast or stamped out en masse. Number 6 is interesting. It's what's described as a corpse preserver. A little late for Halloween, but just in time for Christmas. Others from the first design patents included ones for, as I said, a typeface, cast iron bathtub, like we saw in the Mott ad, of course, and a cast iron stove, and a decorative pattern for an oilcloth floor covering. There is, as you might imagine, a whole very worthwhile area of study in the history of patents and also the history of the evolution of patent drawings. At first, the Patent Office required models, not drawings. The first drawings were often in color before the Patent Office instituted the set of standards that gave all patent drawings the consistent look that they maintained pretty much right up through the ascendance of computer-assisted drawing tools for patent drawings, which is really just the last few years. And for this subject, I'm going to do something shifty and punt and refer you to a series of actually really entertaining seminars on this subject that you can find on YouTube by my friend, the design historian Matthew Bird, for this is a subject unto itself. And if you go to YouTube and punch in what I've got on the top of this slide, History of ID, all one word, patent drawings, you'll get to this and a few other online lectures of Matt's that will cover just about every angle that we don't cover here tonight in a far more entertaining way. What I can say about patent drawings here, though, is that even within the Patent Office's strict set of standards as set forth in a document called the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, or the MPEP, as we like to call it, we find an interesting range in the quality of drawings submitted, as illustrated here by one of my least favorite patent drawings. And I feel a little bad picking on this patent drawing, but it's so disappointing because this is one of my favorite objects, and I would love to have put this in the book, but I just thought the drawing was so, I don't know, it doesn't live up to it. There are far worse patent drawings than this. And in the aforementioned YouTube seminars by Mr. Bird, it's worth looking at because he's got some real doozies. But this, by contrast, we just happen to have one. I knew we wouldn't have to look far here. So you could come up later and see how beautiful this thing is in real life. We'll contrast that with one of my favorite patent drawings, which is for a show car by the designer Brooks Stevens, patented in 1956. This is for a show car known as Die Valkyrie. which Stevens exhibited at the 1955 Paris Salon. Only 2 are known to exist. One sold for $400,000 in 2017. Here's another favorite. This is, in fact, from a series of patents made for products of the Avco Manufacturing Corporation of Cincinnati, better known as the Crosley Corp., in which you can indeed recognize, if I were to show you the whole series, you could recognize the work of the same anonymous hand, in this case using an almost pointillist approach to show how this table radio designed by Carl Reynolds Jr. looks. That's another one that's not on my shelves yet. Patents and patent drawings are, by their essence, in the public domain. For many decades, the Patent Office disseminated new patents by way of gazettes, which were issued on a weekly basis, I believe, and made available at public libraries. I'm sure here, this was one of the prime places for them, around the country. This remained the public's primary interface with the government's growing repository of patents until the internet came along. There are now various online platforms where you can digitally search scanned versions of patents. Google Patents probably most prominent among them. But all of these online searchable platforms seem to be kind of, one way or another, unable to cope with the vastness of the information contained within them. For example, Google's efforts to convert scanned patents to searchable text is a perfect case in point for the kinds of limitations that researchers, such as myself, are up against even now in the digital era. I don't know how George turned into whatever that is. So I decided that to really make use of this new database, this mountain of information I'd found, what I had to do was make my own database, which gets us to what these patents tell us. I did not make my own database for all 1 million patents. That would be crazy. I just did it for 30,000 of them. I did this through a process in which I would start with one particular object, say perhaps something I had found at a flea market, and where it was possible to find a patent for that object and identify its designer, I would search all patents by that designer. Then I would trace out another thread of inquiry, searching out all patents for objects of that particular typology. Patent Office assigns codes for different typologies to help their own reviewers manage them. I did this over and over again, indexing everything I found. In the course of doing this, I wondered if it might be possible to identify the designers of almost every consumer good that had ever been made. And there were certain things that I became obsessed with trying to find. And you'd search and search and search, and sometimes find them, and sometimes not, and then sometimes think that you had looked everywhere, and then because of one of those weird quirks in the scans where George turned into QXOR, or whatever that was, it didn't turn up until, say, after your book came out, which happened a few times. Anyway, so I couldn't find all of these things. The simple answer is that not everything has been patented. Some designers and some manufacturers just haven't valued pursuing design patents. And of course, some applications got rejected by the Patent Office for whatever reason. Still, in the course of doing this, I ran across patents for all sorts of things. And it was always a thrill to find something that I'd collected at a certain point. In this case, a Bakelite radio that turned out to have been the work of designer Robert Duvall Budlong, who turned out to be one of the most prolific industrial designers that probably none of us have ever heard of. Then there was this, from the Ruins book, which we may remember. Progress always comes too late, I think was what the character in Cinema Paradiso said when they invented non-combustible film stock. This would have been great to have known about back when Rob and I did our Hudson Valley Ruins book. Well, here are some of the other things that I found in the course of doing this. This is an object that will be familiar to some of us of a certain age. Here's the design patent for it. Here's one that some of us have in our offices probably, maybe even at home. One for the famous orange-handled Fiskars scissors. Another one that may be familiar to some of us, some of the older ones here. The famous DeLorean from the film Back to the Future. This very futuristic communications device. This even more futuristic communications device. This is sort of a grab bag, just a few thrown in here. This next one is one of my favorites. Buildings, in some cases, where they were intended to be mass-produced. And who here is the first to recognize this one? Yes, Of course, Pizza Hut, patented, I think, 1966. I'd have to squint on my screen to see this. I was hoping to find all sorts of buildings, and some were patented, some were not patented, but this was one of the better ones I found that was patented. Still see these around in places. Here's another of these famous chairs. It was interesting to find these, even if you already knew the designer. Interesting to see the patent drawing for the famous Ames lounge chair wood. This next one is one that I slipped through the cracks that was supposed to be in the book, but in the course of editing down to 1,000, this one at some point inadvertently got edited out. So I, here tonight, can show you designer Otto Kuhler's design patent for what I believe became the R11 series New York City subway car, one of which I believe survives, only one, at the Transit Museum. Stainless steel, it's my favorite of the subway cars in the Transit Museum. Otto Kuhler was somebody, a designer, one of these designers whose names slipped through the cracks, not just in my book, but other places too. So here tonight we have a chance to admire the work of Otto Kuhler. You'd find, in some cases, works by famous designers, forgotten works by famous designers. This is one of my favorite of these. This is a moth tablet by Donald Deskey. Donald Deskey, who is a name that's familiar to anyone. It's familiar to us for having designed the interiors of Radio City Music Hall. Here's Deskey's pool table. Here's a pool table by the architect Walter Lescaz. This next one, one of the lesser-known works by the Italian architect and designer Gio Ponti. This is Ponti's bidet. And then you'd find things that were just complete one-offs. This is maybe my favorite of these. The editors didn't want to put this in the book, but I insisted. This is something that I have not yet found at a flea market. I don't think this ever got made, unfortunately, which I can only say the patent's expired, it's not too late. Now, my favorite place to illustrate the process of inquiry that wound up forming the basis of the curatorial exercise behind the book is a place that some of you may know. It is a place in Brooklyn on the waterfront. It is a place called Dead Horse Bay. Have people been to Dead Horse Bay? There's a few hands, even some applause. It's been the subject of its own presentations. I think there's at least one documentary film, possibly even a book. It's essentially a landfill, a garbage dump out in Jamaica Bay by Floyd Bennett Field, where Flatbush Avenue crosses the Marine Parkway Bridge on its way out to Rockaway. That was capped probably sometime in the 1950s, but whose cap has burst at the periphery and whose contents spill out onto the beach where erosion and tidal action chew away at it, spewing all manner of articles of manufacture of a certain vintage out onto the sand. It's also kind of the ultimate flea market, and everything's free. But we don't take things from Dead Horse Bay. Absolutely not. One afternoon at Dead Horse Bay, while I was in the throes of working on this book, I came across this item. Can anyone recognize what this is? A bathroom scale. I thought no one would get it. It's a bathroom scale. Well, thanks to patents, we know not just what it is, but we know also who designed it and when. This was the work of one Hendrik Hoyer for a company called the Jacobs Brothers Co. of Brooklyn, designed and patented in 1933. Down the beach a little bit, I came across this, which is a little harder to recognize. Anyone? This is hard. I don't know how I even ever figured out what this is. This is an inkwell designed by A.S. Brand et al. For the Carter's Ink Company in 1938. This next one I think will be less hard. Yes, tape dispenser. Not just any tape dispenser. This is none other than Gene Reineke's tape dispenser for the 3M Corp, designed patented in 1941. Now, if paging through old trade publications or seeking out things like postage stamps to identify the designers of these familiar objects was the flashlight in the graveyard approach, finding and figuring out how to use the government's database of design patents for whatever their flaws was like throwing the giant switch that turned on the stadium lights. It helped me to begin to understand the relationship between all of these seemingly disparate kinds of objects The tape dispensers and the old radios, things as seemingly dissimilar as a car and a pair of scissors. And I found designers who designed both cars and scissors. This is something I describe as the invisible web that ties all of these things together. This exploration of design patents made it possible to map out that invisible web in graphic form, which is what I have attempted to do in this rather inscrutable infographic, here using the three examples we just saw from Dead Horse Bay. I've gone ahead and overlaid two different kinds of threads here. Horizontally, we have threads of typology, bathroom scales at the top, tape dispensers across the middle, inkwells at the bottom. The vertical thread, in this case, represents the work of designer Gene O. Reinecke. I was able to find no fewer than 155 design patents for Gene Reinecke. And now, has anybody here ever heard the name Gene Reinecke? Gene Reinecke's 155 patents put him in league with the likes of Henry Dreyfuss or Raymond Loewy, but he's one of the most famous designers that none of us has ever heard of. Gene Reinecke turns out to be one of the most prolific industrial designers of the 20th century. For those 155 items that he patented, there were many more that never got patented. This is a limitation of the usefulness of the patents database as a resource. But even contending with that limitation, in addition to suddenly seeing the relationship between different kinds of objects, this exercise, this throwing on of the stadium lights, suddenly revealed the bodies of work of figures like Gene Reinecke. Reinecke is my favorite of perhaps a dozen such figures. I call him the king of the tape dispenser. But as you can see here, this is a promotional photograph that Reinecke's office put out that was tracked down by the great design historian Vicky Matranga out in Chicago. You can see he did a lot more than just tape dispensers. This exercise revealed entire bodies of work that were basically right in front of me, in front of all of us, waiting to be revealed. This is a graphic from one of the spreadsheets that went into the making of the book. An exercise I did was to take the list of all of the designers who made it into the book and figure out the frequency of their appearance in the book and list those who appeared most frequently. And some of these names are familiar to us. Henry Dreyfuss is right at the top. Raymond Loewy's down a few. Donald Deskey we mentioned. Some of these names are not familiar to us, I'm sure. Melvin Bolt, John R. Morgan's familiar to design historians, but outside of design historians, probably no one's ever heard of him. John Vassos. Everett Worthington was a designer who was probably on his way to becoming a household name like Raymond Loewy, practicing here in New York, but who died of a heart attack while driving down 57th Street in about 1937. And so his accounts, which Coca-Cola, other things, some of them taken over by Raymond Loewy, and no one ever heard of Everett Worthington, but his body of work up to that time is preserved by way of design patents. Design patents have also helped clear up certain misattributions that have persisted down through the years. For example, one of the best known design attributions for the famous Western Electric Model 302 telephone, which everyone knows, of course, is the work of Henry Dreyfuss. Well, this turns out to be one that even the postage stamp got wrong, as is explored in an in-depth article by Dreyfuss biographer Russell Flincham and Ralph Meyer in the Winterthur Portfolio that was published a few years ago. Flincham and Meyer did not rely just on the design patent for this. In this case, there's the Western Electric 302 telephone. There's a wealth of other archival information available in the archives of Bell Labs and the Dreyfuss office to verify what this patent suggests. Here are a few slides from that article, which makes good reading. So in conclusion, from this crazy rabbit hole, what do we get? In the introduction to my book, let's see here, lost in my notes for a second. In the introduction to my book, I wrote that the book is based on the exploration of two ideas that can vastly inform our perspective on the design world we inhabit. The first is the existence of an invaluable yet underutilized historical resource in the form of more than 1 million design patents issued by the USPTO since 1842. The second is that using these documents to identify the design provenance of seemingly inconsequential objects allows us to broaden our concept of design to include mundane items as expressions of human creativity in a way that has generally been reserved for higher art forms up to now. Or, put another way, I hope that, at least for those of us who think of ourselves as design-oriented people, but ideally even for those who don't, that just to flip through the pages of this book will spark a sense for that these everyday objects that are all around us here, even in this room, the tape dispensers, the staplers, the coffee makers, the TV remotes, are not just inert objects, but are themselves byproducts of human creativity. And moreover, that there is an unseen network that links all of these things together. The tape dispenser and the stapler may have been the work of the same designer, or if not, their designers are very likely linked by having created objects of the same typology. In any case, that they and so many other things that we encounter every day are the result of the same creative process, and that armed with this knowledge, the design landscape around us comes alive, as it has really for me, as a whole new world ripe for study and enjoyment, and that this may alter and enhance the way we look at our surroundings, be it in the workplace or the kitchen or wherever we find ourselves surrounded by man-made things. So with that, thank you and good night. Yeah, I think we have time for some questions.
I think we certainly do. What an absolutely fabulous presentation. It was totally terrific. So thank you so much, really. Fabulous. You so generously shared your enthusiasm, your wonderful sense of humor, and your expertise. Anyway, thank you so much. We'd now like to take some questions from the audience, and we have someone right at the back. And please, I want to remind our online audience, please submit questions, and Meg will pass them on to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. I had to buy the book. But my question is, whatever happened to the ever-ready radiator, the heat radiator that I believe started God knows when?
Oh, you got me on the first one.
Well, I'm sorry, my accent, but I'm talking about the, back in the day, we don't have this modern AC control. We had radiators. And I bought the book, by the way. I encourage everyone to buy the book. But the radiator, the heat radiator, from the 40s.
Whatever happened to the ever-ready radiator? I don't know. Now this is another thing I'm going to be obsessively trying to find. You just got the whole next 6 months planned out for me now.
Hi, thank you so much. This was incredible. As my father was a patent attorney, this is particularly relevant. But can you refresh our recollection as to the length of a patent, how many years before it expires? And is the length the same for utility patents as design patents? Thanks.
Okay, this is a question that's better put to a patent attorney. I believe the answer is that the duration is not the same for utility patents as it is for design patents. I believe it is longer for utility patents than it is for design patents. I think it's 20 years for utility patents and 12 or 14 years for design patents. I may be wrong, and I may be right about how it was at one point in history and not anymore. But for that, I have to do a little follow-up. But it's an excellent question.
This may also be attorney-oriented type of question, but what within a category, what were the differences you saw with the appearances, the phenotype of these objects? So, for example, like a tape dispenser, or they're just subtle permutations, and each of those got a patent, or do they have to be quite different in order to get a patent?
Okay, so to rephrase the question, in my understanding of it, did I notice distinctions between certain types of things, or for something to be patented, did it really have to be visually distinct from something else? I think per the letter of the law, a case had to be made that it was distinct from everything else. And so there are certain things that, now I know for a fact, one instance comes to mind. of an alarm clock by Dreyfus that was design patented, and the patent was issued. And someone sued and challenged it, and a judge invalidated the patent. And to me, I look at this particular alarm clock. It was a West Clocks alarm clock from about 1940, and to me, it's one of the most distinct alarm clocks that was ever made. I mean, I could spot one of these things at a flea market from a mile away. It's got this little chrome thing on the body, but somehow a judge didn't agree. So it's a subjective thing for sure. I think you'll hear that the scrutiny given to design patents is not quite as strict as the scrutiny given to utility patents. But it comes down to the patent examiner's review to the best of his or her ability of all of the existing patents that they could get their hands on to compare that to the patent that's being applied for. And it's a subjective process. So there are some things that have gotten design patents that probably never should have. And I would come across certain things and be like, how on earth did they ever get a patent for this? And there are other things that got a patent that was later challenged and invalidated. So to answer your question, I think you'll find things and you'll scratch your head and say, how on earth did they ever get this patented? And other things, should have been a slam dunk but weren't. So yeah, human factor there.
Right, the online questions are coming in fast and furious, but I do have this gentleman beside me. I'm going to let him ask his question, and then I'm going to take a few online questions, and I do see some other hands, and I realize that this part of the room I've had my back to, and you may have some questions.
Do design patents have to include a physical manifestation of the device being patented? Or simply a drawing?
Just a drawing. The patent office, as I said, at first required models. I don't know when the requirement for models went away, but I suspect the requirement for models, because they ran out of room for them, went away before 1842, which is when design patents were instituted. So the short answer to your question is just drawings.
Thank you.
From Angela online, can you tell us about some of the more interesting design dead ends you noticed as you moved through the years of the records?
Design dead ends. Okay, I'm not sure if I understand that question, but in my head I have an interpretation of it. So should I just run with that?
Yes, I think go right ahead.
Okay, I would interpret a design dead end to mean that a certain, and I talk about this in the introductory text to the book a little bit, to the best of my ability to talk about it. That certain typologies evolve through the years and get to a point where it seems like they stop evolving. And cars, you could say, are sort of that. I mean, cars are still evolving, but if you think about the evolution of how cars look from year to year now versus how they evolved in the 1950s, it's almost completely flat now. It's a design dead end to me. More than that, televisions. You think of what a television looks like now. It's a black rectangle. And here's one to address your question from a minute ago. Do I notice that things really have to be different from one another to get a patent? I see some of these design patents that are being issued for TVs now, and how many design patents can you issue for a black rectangle? And yet, in the book, at the front of the book, we have some evolutionary studies of, like, say, 10 different typologies of things, and one of them is TVs. And I, at one point, wanted to just do an evolutionary study of just TVs in the last 10 years, which would just be all the same drawing. But I did manage to get the last 3 in that series of recent televisions. They all look exactly the same. Smartphones being another one. So to me, that's a design dead end. I don't know if that's what the question was really meant to ask. But now, why does that happen? I mean, I think part of it is manufacturing techniques, materials that are available. I think a lot of what accounts for when you see historically a lot of change in the way products of a certain type looked from one year to the next, when products of the same typology looked vastly different over the space of just a few years. Some of that's accounted for by different materials being used. So for radios, for instance, in the 1920s, they were being made out of wood, and then technical developments facilitated radios being made out of proto-plastics, Bakelite, and early kinds of plastics, which involved a different kind of manufacturing technique than the kinds of plastics that we now use. But you think of televisions, well, there's not really been a new kind of plastic that's been introduced in the manufacture of televisions in recent years. So that's kind of accounts for this dead ending.
I think
in
that's
my
an
estimate.
extremely thorough answer. What was a visit to the patent office like? This is from Diane online. Any adventures?
Okay. Well, this book was written mostly during the pandemic, and so there were no visits to the patent office, I'm sorry to say. I had been planning for a thrilling visit to the patent office archive and had been in correspondence with the archivist, a certain Pamela Anderson, Pamela Anderson, very helpful in Kansas City, Missouri, and was planning this week-long trip to Kansas City to go and delve into all of the patent archives, as I was sure I would need to for the production of the book. And Faden was able to just work from the PDFs that are available online. So I didn't have to go to Kansas City and meet Pamela Anderson. So I can't answer that question, unfortunately, but one day.
I'm curious about industrial machinery, lathes, motors, rotors, turbines, types, sizes, machines that are used to make products. Are there many, many different design patents for those?
There are a surprising number of design patents for machines and very functional utilitarian things that you would think would not need a design patent at all. And this could be its whole own area of study. My favorite one, and I don't know if this gets to what you had in mind especially, but tire treads. There's probably thousands, certainly hundreds of design patents for tire treads. Now, you could say that here it's not so much the appearance that's being patented, but the form that's being patented. And it's very important, the form of a tire tread, how it's interacting with the road and with snow and with different things that you might encounter on the road. So that's one where you think of design patents and you think aesthetics, you think Henry Dreyfuss or Raymond Loewy or streamlining of something, and that's certainly not what's happening with tire treads. That's purely a functional consideration, we think. But then there are design patents for things that are not particularly being styled, but heavy machinery, lathes and things like that, where maybe just because the manufacturer or the designer, someone who is financing this whole endeavor, thought it was very important to protect the design, so they would have both utility patents and design patents filed for this thing, even though it wasn't about aesthetics, but they were just trying to cover all their bases. Meanwhile, other manufacturers didn't think that design patents were important at all, and just completely forego them. But then you have this other interesting neighborhood of consideration on this, where very, very utilitarian kinds of things, and the first thing that comes to my mind is home boilers that go in your basement, were in the 1930s being lavished with attention by industrial designers, streamlining them. So there are these design patents, and this is something that these are not preserved anywhere. I mean, there are probably some still in basements in Pennsylvania and places, but you'll find these design patents for these fabulous looking, streamlined, like hot water heaters and things. That was a period in the 1930s when industrial design as a profession was new and a novelty, and they were designing the hell out of everything. So I hope somewhere in that pile of words was an answer to your question.
Well, that was very good. And talking of boilers or boiler museums.
Tom,
Yes.
you've given us
There's a boiler museum?
a water heater museum on the 4th floor here.
No.
Yes, it's all very, just very quickly, 2 things. The question in the back about the radiators, you're off the hook with the 6 months of work, because fortunately our past president is the world's expert in steam heating and hydronics. So he's taught us to care for our 103 radiators. And with respect to the water heaters, we have, and it's not open tonight, so you'll have to come back. But there is a master plumber in California, Larry Weingarten, who salvaged all of these beautiful water heaters that would have ended up in a dump. And he brought them back to life. They actually work. And he went so far as even can the sediment and put the name of the street where he found it. And needless to say, Larry is now living off the grid in California. But he's available by email for questions. So.
Oh, thank you.
We have a plethora of questions to come, but I also aware we have a wonderful book available for purchase. So maybe we'll just take a few more questions. And of course, the people, our in-person audience, will be free to ask as many questions as possible after the lecture. But I'm going to take a few more, and I know there's some people over here very eagerly have questions, and over there. So should we do kind of rapid fire?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you find any significant women designers with a significant presence in the design patent database from Constance Online?
Yes. The short answer is yes, and I tried to be sure that they got included. There are a number through the years who were active going back in the 1920s, 30s, the very earliest years of industrial design as a profession, and not represented to the extent that they should have been, but there were some. Yep.
Right. What was the most fascinating patent that you discovered?
Oh my God, that's impossible to answer.
Okay.
I don't know. There was one that I was going to include in that couple of slides of the weird and unusual. Maybe that pig with the clock hands coming out of it. Yeah.
Okay, right, okay. Are design and utility patents reviewed by the same examiner?
Oh, great question. Okay, and I don't know the answer, but I can find out. Have that person.
Okay, and that
give us-
was
give
that
it-
was from Marilyn
Have
online.
them talk to the screeners,
Yeah.
and we'll get an answer.
Okay.
I don't actually know. I suspect the answer is
Yeah.
probably, could be yes or no. Don't know.
Right.
I'll find out.
Right. Okay.
I suspect the answer could be yes or no.
Yeah. Can U.S. design patents be recognized internationally to protect the design?
Okay, that's a good question. So different countries have their own systems for patenting things, and it's more countries all the time that have been adding systems for patenting things. There is a nonprofit that was established, I want to say maybe in the late 70s or 80s, and I'm blanking out on the name of it. The name is in the book, but there is an organization that has attempted to kind of establish an international patenting system that would transcend national boundaries. I'm going to say the short answer is not really. But people have asked the question, people have thought there should be such a thing, there have been attempts made to establish such a thing. But there's also this whole thing of, especially between the United States and China right now, of
Sure.
things being taken by one country and run with in the other.
Does each state have its own patent office? This is from Mark online.
No, I don't think
Right.
so. I
Okay.
think it's just the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Now, before it was established in before 1790, different states did have their own systems, but
Right.
yeah, I don't think now.
Okay, well, now I'm going to take from the audience, and I'm going to ask you make your questions concise, and we'll have concise answers, and we'll get as many as we can in, say, the next 5-6 minutes. How does that sound?
Good.
Okay, here we go.
Thank you. What did you say the rough number was of the two types of patents to date?
It's approximately 10 to 1, but the Patent Office just issued utility patent number 12 million, I think, in June, and design patent number 1 million sometime, I think, in the
Even with
past year.
13 million, it seems like a very low number with all of the manufactured items. There must be 1 billion UPCs for things sold in New York City alone, even though I know that's varies.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see that being a thing. But when you try to go look at all 1 million of them, then it doesn't seem like such a low number anymore. Yeah.
Hi. I was taken by the artistry of it and the design, and somebody comes up with an idea and somebody designs it or drafts it, I suppose. Were any of those people who did that, were they great illustrators, or did they have other artistic qualities? Because you mentioned somebody had 134 patents. Was that the person with the idea or the designer of the artistic work?
Well, the person with the 134 patents is 155 for Gene Reinecke. Gene Reinecke, those are 155 patents with his name on them, let's say. And now, he had employees. The idea was that those 155 patents were depicting things that Gene Reinecke had designed. The drawings themselves done by someone else. Now, I'm sure there's instances where the person whose name on the patent is also the person who drew the patent drawing. And some of these really crappy patent drawings, you're pretty sure it is that person. But somebody like Gene Reinecke was hiring someone who's was a professional at doing patent drawings. But then again, Gene Reinecke, as I said, he had employees. So things were the work of people on his staff, but his name got put on the patent. Now, so this is a shortcoming of the usefulness of design patents, because sometimes it'll be Gene Reinecke's name or Henry Dreyfuss's name or Raymond Loewy's name on the thing, but really it's the work of somebody who was in their office. And sometimes that's a designer who in their youth did that work for their boss, Raymond Loewy, and then became a famous designer in their own right. And it gets very, very difficult to tell, whether something was Raymond Loewy's or whether it was somebody on Loewy's staff, for instance. And Loewy had a huge office, so there were a lot of people in his office who then became very well-known designers in their own right later. Yeah.
I too have quite a few Bakelite radios, and a lady on our street had this particular radio that may kind of appeal to you as well. I think it probably tops the pig clock. It was the radio toilet roll dispenser.
Oh,
and it was
yeah.
from like the late 60s, I think.
I have one
thought
that's
that would
actually
appeal.
in the shape of a toilet. And you open the lid, and it's the speaker. Where is this? I can't see where that question was coming from. There, right in front of me. Okay, yep.
I have not taken
Multitasking.
any question from this side. No, sir, you have had the opportunity. So anyone on this side have a question?
I don't know how well this applies, but I haven't had a chance to look at your book. I came a little late, but I'm told, and I'm fascinated by your lecture, but I'm told that mostly in the book you have images of the products included, but no history. So and yet you recount very interesting history, but if I wanted to research something myself from, let's say, the image in the book and the information you give there, can I fairly easily find some history covering that?
Okay, yes. So the book, the 1,000 patents in the book are there with nothing to really describe them, unless there's the basic information that comes from the patent is all there. But for each of these, there's a story. And my favorite example of this from something that's in the book is there's the patent for the Tucker automobile, which may be familiar to some people here. And the Tucker automobile, for instance, was itself the subject of a feature film by Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, so that's to me, my favorite and a great film, which I loved as a kid, hadn't seen for probably 30 years. And then when the book came out, I rewatched the movie and I was like, this is a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen the movie, Tucker, starring Jeff Bridges, this is a great recommendation for the cold weather coming up. So that's an example of something, just one of those drawings from that pile of 1,000 that has a story that's that good of a story that did it win an Oscar, the movie? I don't know off the top of my head. When the book first came out, maintained an Instagram account for the book, which you can still find on Instagram. It is Design Patent Daily, all one word. It was a play on Women's Wear Daily. So for that, what I tried to do was every day run in that Instagram account, every single day. I don't know how I did this. I did it for about a year. Show a patent of something that had been patented on that day. And then give Instagram, I learned, cuts you off at 2,000 characters. So up to 2,000 characters, try to tell the story of that particular thing. I did this for about a year, as I said. So I didn't get all 1,000 things from the book. But in the course of doing this, I learned so much. I think I learned as much from doing that Instagram to try to hawk the book as I learned from doing the book. It was incredible when you get into the stories behind each and every single one of these 1,000 things. So some of them, can you find the story behind them? For the Tucker, really easy, you just get the movie, Others, you really got to dig, and you might not come up with anything. But if nothing else, there was always something to say. There was never anything that I couldn't find anything to say about. If nothing else, you say, this designer had 12 other patents issued to him, and the other patents were these 12 things, and you can get into comparing those 12 things. The subject was it was the rabbit hole of rabbit holes. That's a long answer for your question, but I recommend the movie.
Please detail how the Patent Office arrives at approving a patent? How many employees are involved in the process? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, that's an excellent question that I don't have an answer for. But write your information down and we'll find out and get back to you, because I should know that. I don't know how many people work for the USPTO. It's a lot of people, though. It's armies, you know, and to think of what's involved, you have to, you know, as I was seeking out patents and, you know, have to sort of say, okay, I really want to find the one I never found was for the igloo cooler. I really wanted to find the design patent for the igloo cooler, and I never found it. Is this really not patented? The classic igloo cooler? But for people working for the patent office, it's their job to find that. They got to find that thing. You know, if it exists, somebody's trying to patent something, they need to go through everything and see if there's anything comparable, you know, that would say, no, we can't patent this because somebody else has already patented it. So that's by way of saying it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people and it's a lot of work. But they can do it remotely. So you can live in Hawaii and be working with the patent office. So, you know, something to think about.
Tom, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow. What an absolutely terrific lecture, really. So informative, and as I said, your enthusiasm is so contagious. I feel like we're looking at every object in this room in a slightly different way, and it was so great of you to share your expertise. I have a very quick question. How long did it take to assemble this research?
It's such a blur. Years. I mean, it started slowly, and I started finding these things, and then I started saying, I've got to find some way of tracking these, and then maybe 5-6 years.
Right.
I would say 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
Anyway, what a superlative lecture. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to remind everyone that this absolutely inspiring book is available for purchase. And I think there's a strong chance that Tom might sign and dedicate the book to you, so I want to encourage that. And of course, it is available online for online audience through the Phaidon website. So in conclusion, before we invite our in-person audience to have a drink, buy a book, Victoria Dengel is going to say a few words.
Tom, that was absolutely delightful and so entertaining, and you've made the case. I always say, I grew up with a father who had a very curious mind, and it makes your whole life to look at everything and think about things. And even minus any text, I just love exploring the images and thinking about, again, the mind of a person or how they looked at something, how they got inspired. So thank you for putting all of this together. Yes, thank you. And I love your other books too. And I wanted to thank tonight, Karen Taylor, as we wind down this month, for a wonderful 19 lectures. Just an amazing job. Karen, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. And to Angelo Vigorito, who sits there, our archivist, he's our archivist. He's also an electrical engineer.
Please take a bow.
Yeah,
please,
Angelo.
please.
And technical director, a lot of people have abandoned the hybrid thing. He keeps us going. Thank you, Angelo. And thank you to Meg Stanton, who's online and answers questions, and to our volunteers who man the desk, Mary, Arlene, and Nancy, and to Jimmy, who is in the back, always assisting. And I just want to also say our president, Jim Holohan, Dan's brother, is in the audience tonight. Hello, Jim. And I just want to conclude by thanking our audience, both in-home and online. We have a really devoted audience. And so there were 19 lectures, and someone like Barbara and Tom were here for just about every one, which is really amazing when you think of people making 19, evenings to spend with us. That's amazing. Some people you can't, even your good friends, it's hard to plan a dinner. But thank you for coming. It is. So, and I just love this. So 1837, we started this whole lecture series, and it's just a wonderful thought to see people gathering and a lot of familiar faces. It's so beautiful that it still exists, because it's really the best way to receive the information instead of phone or a screen. So thank you for coming in live and in person, Tom Rinaldi. And we hope there's another project in you, because I could tell, and we look forward to your return. Thank you.
Finally, a little memento, the poster. So thank you so much again. I am going to conduct Tom to the back of the room where his wonderful book will be available for purchase. Thank you all for coming, and happy holidays, very happy holidays.